I'm Nick Norton, and I'm a composer from Los Angeles. I got into music pretty early in my life, probably about halfway through elementary school by joining the school band playing saxophone, and then started teaching myself guitar so I could play in rock bands, and did that in punk and hardcore and those sorts of scenes through middle school and high school and really through to today, I guess. And at the same time, got some formal training through continuing to play sax in a school band and singing in choirs. And then in college, I double majored in music and political philosophy. And somewhere along the line, probably I guess end of my first year, I took a composition class because it sounded kind of fun. And after the very first time I had a piece played, I said, wow, I want to do that with my life. So I've been pursuing composition pretty seriously ever since. All right, this might sound kind of crazy, but I really seriously believe that my medium, the medium in which I create art, is other people's minds. Um, and I know how ridiculous that might sound, but from a scientific perspective, let's think about music for a second. Music requires a listener to exist. Sound is just air jiggling around until it hits an eardrum that is hooked into a brain, so the brain can say that was some sound. You can't have a melody without memory. If you go da 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 da, that da da, the last part of it doesn't make any sense if you can't remember what the first note was, so you can tell how far it went to the second note so that you can recognize your melody. So yeah, you need a listener of some sort for sound to exist, and therefore I think you need a listener for music to exist. And we can take a more holistic, less scientific approach to that too, in a very practical way. I'm a composer. If I draw some dots on some staff paper, well, I need a musician to play that. And the musician, once they make their violin strings vibrate or whatever, they need a listener to turn that into music. So for me, the thing that I'm working on is the listener's mind. And then as a composer, what I ask myself is how can I best influence or guide that listener to have the artistic experience that I'm trying to create for them. If I'm saying that the responsibility for music making lies with the listener rather than with the musician or the composer, it means that I can open up my compositional practice to nearly infinite modes of creation. Pretty much anything I can do to influence a listener's experience can be an act of composition, and I love that. Because if I was always working in the same way, I'd probably get really bored and quit. Um, in practice, what it means is that I usually end up working backwards from the experience that I imagine I want a listener to have to what I can do to make that happen. If I want a listener to have something happen that doesn't exist yet, then maybe I do go the traditional composer musician route and write some sheet music and play it myself, or find someone to play it, or make an electronic piece and perform that in a concert, or release a recording. The things that we think composers and musicians do. But maybe I want a listener to have an experience of a piece that already exists. Well, then, am I composing if I produce a concert that puts that piece in a certain context so they can hear it the way I hear it? I think so. Or maybe even smaller things like sending someone a mixtape or a Spotify or SoundCloud link or something. They aren't all that different to me from writing music in the traditional sense. They're all aspects of composition. They're all ways to influence listening. You can't control people. You can't say somebody's having a really bad day. Well, they're going to feel pretty differently about what they hear at the end of that really horrible day than someone who's having the best day of their life, and then hears your piece, and then it becomes their favorite piece because it reminds them of the best day of their life. You can't control that, of course, but maybe maybe sometimes the most important thing I can do as a composer to influence listening experience is just being nice to people. Um, I really I don't think of composing as a thing where you sit down and say I'm going to compose for the next 3 hours. I think of it as just how I live. I've always been really, really into political philosophy since I don't know, I read like Plato when I was like 14, and Republic blew my mind, and uh, ever since I've been really into how power works, how the concept of freedom works, and things like that. And a conclusion that I've pretty well come to in my path or my career as an artist, or an opinion that I've pretty well solidified for myself, um, is that artistic creation or artistic experiences are one of the only ways to access freedom in the modern world, and that gets me stoked whenever I can participate in such experiences. We talk about freedom a lot in the U.S., but it's not really a real thing for a lot of people. You say you've got freedom of speech, but you kind of only have it if your speech fits into one of two ideologies. Otherwise, you're dismissed as crazy, or people report you or whatnot. You've got freedom to travel and to live where you want to live, but only if you've got enough money to travel, or only if you've got the right documents to live where you want to live. If you got a job that dictates how you're going to spend your time and you can't afford to leave it, well, are you really free? I would argue no. And that the only real freedom we have, unless you're extremely rich, because those people can do whatever they want, the only freedom you have is in your mind, is in your freedom of thought, and in your inner emotional life, and in how you perceive the world, and in your opinions. And we normally don't get to spend all that much time in that internal state of freedom because we have all this external stuff that we have to deal with. So when it comes to artistic work, though, when you're telling the truth in your work and letting your inner world become a part of the outer world by creating something, then you're really engaging with your freedom, with the thing that makes you human, that makes the world worth living in, and things like that. So I feel like what I'm both excited about and what is also my responsibility as an artist is to help people access their own inner freedom and to access that for myself. And despite what I just said about responsibility, it's also really exhilarating. It's like if you've ever jumped off a cliff into the ocean, or like gone on a roller coaster, and you're pretty scared of it at first because there's nothing helping you, there's nothing holding you up. It's just you and gravity. But then you do it, and like the second you hit the water, if you're jumping off a cliff in this example, you feel exhilarated and like you want to do it again, and it's totally addictive, and all of a sudden jumping off cliffs into water becomes like your favorite thing to do every summer. That's what making art feels like for me. And it's just what I want to spend all of my time on whenever possible. The earliest thing I remember creating is a drawing of a boat and a whale, and I can't remember it super clearly. I was probably like 5 years old, and my mom signed me up for an art class at the mall. But I remember walking out of the mall holding this drawing, might have been a painting, and there was a boat and a whale, or maybe the whale was above the boat, I'm not sure. And I remember thinking like, whoa, I made something. I've created something that was inside my head and is now out here in the world, and that's awesome. I love that feeling. I want to keep doing this. And I think it was the same feeling, actually, when I was in college and took my first composition class, that I was like, yeah, I want to do this forever. the first time someone played one of my pieces. The thing is, I don't think music is necessarily the most important. I don't think the fact that it's music is the most important thing about, to me, about being an artist, you know? I think it's creating something and doing all the stuff that we've already talked about, and music is just kind of the way I'm best equipped to do that because I know how to play guitar and have taken a lot of music lessons in my life and listened to a lot of music and pretty techie and things, but there's an artistic impulse in there, and I don't really mind if it comes out via writing or photography or anything else. Music's just the one I'm kind of on and probably will continue to be on for quite some time. I don't. I don't feel like a professional artist in the sense of the word professional in Western society. You know, in a capitalist world, the word professional means that you make your income from whatever comes after the word professional, right? So professional artist, to me, implies that you're getting paid a whole lot, or at least enough to live off for your work. And I think, yeah, I do get paid for my work, sometimes even enough to cover rent, and that's really cool when that happens, and I feel very validated when that happens. But if, you know, I'm writing a piece and the market doesn't demand that piece right then, and I got no buyers or something along those lines, then what? All of a sudden I'm not a professional artist anymore? That seems like a problem as a way of classifying things. And there are a lot of artists who I look up to who are perhaps more established in their careers, or perhaps not even a little bit established in their careers, but who make really great work that don't use the term and don't mind about the term. And I've found that when I think about when did I know I really, I really am an artist or something like that, like I'm an adult and I'm still making art and I'm making it the main thing in my life, it didn't actually have to do with money. It had to do with priorities and with putting art first and finding and arranging the other things in my life to be able to put my art first and make sure I have the time and the resources to make art, to make music. I felt like that was possible when people who weren't my friends, at least at first, started reaching out to me about it and saying, hey, we like what you're doing, do you want to do this? And that felt very validating, and made me say, okay, I can really do this thing perhaps. But I don't want to conflate acceptance or income with being an artist. If you're overly concerned about how others feel about your work, you'll never be vulnerable enough to make the work that will actually succeed and connect with people. Somewhere along the line, pretty recently, I would even say, I figured out that honesty and vulnerability are really the key things in being an artist. And if you're doing work you really truly believe in, not that you think other people will believe in, not that you think fits into some idea of what work is supposed to be, but just what you believe in, that's when your art can really truly resonate. That's when your art is true. And I think maybe I don't think we need a measure of how much of an artist someone is, because what's the point of that? Let's just focus on what work they're doing, right? But if we do, maybe the measure we should look for is how honest someone's work is. Yeah. Maybe telling the truth in your work should be the mark of a professional artist, if we need to use that term. So here's my creative prompt. Imagine something you'd like to see in the world. And that can be anything. That doesn't have to be an artistic thing, right? Like maybe you want to imagine there's a new medicine for some disease, or there's a new park in your town, or Or since AT&T bought HBO, they're now only creating new television shows for dogs as opposed to for people, because dogs need to be entertained too. Whatever it is, work backwards, just like I do. When I say I'm figuring out the experience I want a listener to have, then working backwards to what I should be doing. So say you want to create a new medicine, so work backwards from there. To do that, you need some training in science. If you need some training in science, maybe you have to go to college for science in some way. To get into college for science, maybe you have to do really well in your science classes in high school. But maybe before you can do really well in your science classes in high school, you have to get into a science class in high school. And to do that, maybe you have to go see your guidance counselor or admissions counselor or whatever they call it now. So maybe the smallest possible step you can take toward making a medicine that cures cancer is making an appointment with your guidance counselor, right? That sounds kind of crazy, but when you break things down into these really, really small, doable steps, well, it gives your day-to-day actions meaning and direction, and it makes the big things into doable things, into achievable things. You can create something in the world. So imagine something, anything that you'd like. Work backwards to the smallest possible thing you could do, the easiest possible thing you could do in that direction, and write that thing down, and then go do it, and then repeat the process. That's your prompt, and I hope you enjoy it and make the world a better place too.